Well, welcome everybody to the very first edition of Read, Write, Local, Unbound, a weekly show from Avon Lake Public Library on Zoom, where we meet authors, usually on their home turf and on their own. This is where editing comes in handy. On their own initiative, on their own terms. So, without further ado, our first author is Carly West, who she can tell you much more details, but it was the Scholarly Banana series that is still in progress that really got me interested in this. Also, it was just a random phone call from Carly, I think back in February, that kind of gave me the idea to do this whole thing in the first place. So that's why I think it's appropriate that Carly is first. So
no pressure or anything. Jeez.
Yeah, well, we have a friendly audience. We'll figure this out. So Carly, just introduce yourself to this friendly audience. And yes, if you're making any noise, we will silence you. We are librarians, we know how to do that. And but I think if you want to ask any questions, you can ask them in the chat and I'll relay them to the person, unless you want to ask them directly to her, but she's probably going to be busy doing a presentation. Victoria, my wife, is on the line there and she can help with any technical issues, or if you have questions you want to ask by chat. Yep, okay, there you are.
Mm-hmm.
I will now turn the floor over to Carly. So if you want to see speaker view, then you can see her graphics up close and personal when she's talking. So Carly, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. I am Carly West. I am the author, artist, and chief executive fruit of the Scholarly Banana, which is a graphic novel series that retells old creepy fairy tales and tricks you into learning fun facts about them. So in this talk, you're going to see the inner workings of the series. You're going to get to know a little bit about me, and you're going to learn why and how I create the Scholarly Banana. I'm going to show you the inspiration behind it, some of the trial and error I went through while developing the concept. And then finally, I'm going to take you through step by step of how I actually make these books, from the research phases and the drafting to sculpture, photography, all the way through publication. And if you have any questions along the way, definitely shout them out. I'll be happy to answer them. So at its core, the Scholarly Banana is a mashup of art, humor, and irreverent nerdiness. So as the saying goes, the banana does not fall far from the tree. So it is not a coincidence that these three pillars of the series are essential to who I am as a person as well. So growing up, I really was into art, creativity. I just love to make things, all types of things. I just think that there's nothing more fun than envisioning really just fantastical worlds and figuring out how to bring those visions to life. So I also really like to do that with writing. It's not just visual art. Specifically, I've always been into humor writing. So growing up, I really thought, I wanted to be a cartoonist, or maybe like work for Mad Magazine was really big at the time. Maybe co-write songs with Weird Al. It was a lot of comedy, a lot of satire. And what you're looking at here, this is actually my homage to Mad Magazine. I did this newsletter for myself in 6th grade that was chronicling the current events that were happening in Rocky River Middle School around 1993. And so I just had a blast just kind of poking fun at that. And I thought I was hilarious. So yeah, comedy writing has always been a really big thing for me. And then that last part of that triad with the art, the humor, the third part is the nerdiness. So people nerd out about all kinds of things. I happen to be on Team Humanities, which is cultural studies. So this encompasses a variety of topics such as language, literature, history, philosophy, all kinds of good stuff. And, so I thought for a minute, like, oh, yeah, I might be happy being a teacher. of one of those subjects. I liked them all, so don't ask me to pick one. But yeah, that was always important to me. I always loved learning about it. And I just thought it would be cool to spend the rest of my life learning about it in one way or another. Now, what ended up happening, though, was when it came time to choose a career path in high school, nothing felt like the right fit for me. I was into art, but I wasn't like, I didn't really feel like fine arts was a good fit. I love to write, but I didn't want to be a journalist. It was really the humor that was my thing. And yeah, nothing felt great to me. It was because I wanted all those three things at once. Now, had there been a major in gym Hensonology, I would have gone with that in a heartbeat, like sign me up. But it's just a shame that there's no such thing as getting a bachelor's degree in Muppet. So what I ended up doing instead is I went the teaching and humanities route and graduated from Cleveland State with a bachelor's degree in Spanish education. I liked the idea of teaching a lot, but by the time I graduated, I had also developed enough serious doubts to hold off on jumping into being a high school Spanish teacher. And really at that time, that call, the creative world, was becoming really hard to ignore. I felt like I had given up a little bit too soon. So after graduating, I did what a lot of aspiring creative people do at one time or another. I worked wherever. I got temp jobs. I rolled coins and stuck labels on popcorn bags and really hoped that something would work out for me. And it did. In 2007, by just pure coincidence, I fell into a job at Wildflower Bakery in Rocky River. So the owner, her name's Sue, she understood my displaced artist syndrome that I had going on. It turned out that she had actually been a French major at Cleveland State, so we kind of bonded over that together. And she welcomed me into her bakery, and she gave me the opportunity to learn cake decorating on the job with them. Now, cake might not seem like it has anything to do with publishing a book, but this experience helped me so much. I learned how to be very creative very quickly because I had a lot of cakes to decorate. I got comfortable showing people my work. It didn't matter if I was nervous or terrified. I had to show people my work because it was my job. People would be very cranky if I said that they couldn't have their cake. And the last part of why that was such a good experience was that for 5 years, people ate my designs, which sounds like a terrible thing, but it was actually an extremely positive experience. It made me really appreciate the creative process of doing the work, and then I was able to let it go and move on to the next thing and just get excited about the next thing, not so much hold on to what I had just done previously because it was gone. And that mindset was so helpful to me, especially when I was in the early phases of drafting the Scholarly Banana, of being able to let stuff go. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but who would think that cake would toughen a person up so much? So as my confidence was growing at the bakery, my artistic confidence, I started to build up enough courage to sell my own non-edible art online. So my boyfriend at the time, Ben, who's now my husband, he's an IT guy, and being around him really inspired me to try digital art. He hooked me up with a copy of Photoshop, and I got into it like right away. I loved making these surreal photo collages. And so, yeah, I spent a lot of time with that. And I put some of my work in local galleries around Cleveland. I never had any big showcases or anything like that. I wasn't that, important or anything. But, that really felt good to me. I felt really proud to put my art out there and just say, yes, I make art. That really meant a lot. So moving forward with that, though, in 2010, I discovered I had a knack for sculpture. And the long story short is that by 2011, I had transitioned from my creative job at the bakery to starting a creative business for myself. And since 2010, I've made and sold thousands of original character figurines and hundreds of custom wedding cake toppers for very nice people all over the world. And that was pretty great experience. So a lot of people today know me from a brand I had called the Republic of Cute. So I would do a lot of shows in the Cleveland area. I participated in the Cleveland Flea during its first 2 or 3 seasons, and just some local stuff, and had a lot of fun with that. But working with that brand, I started to lean more into the characters and the stories behind the characters that I was creating. So I started dabbling more into what's essentially toy photography, but with my own handmade toys. So I started bringing Photoshop back into the mix for the first time in a while, really. And it was really great because suddenly I had all these really colorful, funny models to shoot and do all these Photoshop collages with. And over time, I discovered that for me, my creative sweet spot, it wasn't being a sculptor. A lot of people thought of me as a sculptor. And I'm like, well, not really. Like, I just kind of started that. Like, I've done so many other things before. I was definitely labeled though as the sculpture person. But I was like, I'm actually not that. My real thing is this multimedia. I love combining the sculpture with the photography to create these funny little narratives going on.
And also, I might add, you're a storyteller. I think you probably figured that out pretty soon. It wasn't just, here, you make a story with it.
Yes. And actually, you just anticipated what is coming up next. And exactly what you said. I realized, I would love to take the stories further. So I started making a comic series based on my Republic of Cute characters. This was surprisingly very liberating to me. Like once I brought the writing in, it's like, oh, I'd forgotten how much I love doing that. I'd been so appreciative of being able to be a professional visual artist for so many years, because that was a dream too. So I'm like, oh, this is great. This is what I'll do. I had completely just displaced that other side. Once I figured out how to work that in, it was like, oh, that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to get better at it. I wanted to do more, put more out there. So that was just such a creative time for me. I had so much fun. It didn't take long once I started dabbling in those comics to have the language teacher in me emerge. And I started making these vocabulary themed comics. There was nothing I was more proud of for me personally. And it wasn't because these were masterful or anything. It was because I was combining all these parts of myself that meant so much to me. And then to be able to kind of execute them all in this way just felt really special. I felt like I was onto something with it. I wasn't quite sure what that would be though. The Republic of Cute was not an educational brand, but somewhere in the back of my head, I was like, I'm determined I want to do something. So I'll bookmark that. And if I ever have a chance to do something more with writing, I'd like to follow down that path if I can. So that is the backstory of, I guess, the components to make the book. Now, the folklore aspect of it was actually kind of happening simultaneously in the background. So I'm going to jump back to 2002 because I can actually tell you the exact moment I discovered my love of folklore studies. So this was at, where was this? Oh, this was at Borders at the Promenade in Westlake. This was before it was even Crocker Park. It was the Promenade. I was browsing through the philosophy, it was the philosophy, religion section. That's where all the real cool kids go. So naturally, I was there with all those cool kids. I was just browsing around, and there was a book that caught my eye, and it was the Classic Fairy Tales by Maria Tadar. And so it struck me as odd that a book about fairy tales would have been in this fairly sophisticated sort of highbrow section. I'm like, oh, I'm fancy. What's this book about fairy tales doing here? You know, I'm a new college student, really into these academic things. I was like, what's this? So I picked it up and gave it a look, not really knowing what to expect. I knew fairy tales were old. I knew that some were weird. I didn't know any more than that, though. That was like the extent of it. Looking through this book, I was shocked to see how many different cultural variations there actually were for stories like Little Red Riding Hood and Cinderella, Snow White, that many of these stories were just so interesting. I couldn't believe how entertaining these were to me. What was even better, though, was that at the back of the book, Maria Tadar includes a section that explains the history behind some of these tales. You know, it turns out that there's actually some interesting stuff to learn from these stories. There are critical essays that covered a variety of topics like history and gender studies, psychology, sociology, literary criticism. These were all things I was learning in college at the time, but I was like, this is about fairy tales. That's amazing. You know, not everyone reads a Dostoevsky novel, but everyone knows who Little Red Riding Hood is. I loved how even the playing field was. We could all relate to these things. And I just love that. It felt so cool to me that a subject that was so seemingly so humble actually had all this highbrow, really interesting stuff all filtered through it. And so I have been collecting books about fairy tales since then.
Carly,
So,
if I could just jump in here.
yeah.
These are your books. I should just show people where they live in our library. That is 398.2. That is folklore in adults and in children's. And the children's folklore section is huge. And that's where you're going to find all the different retellings of that. And we've held on to that, even though pressure to make it smaller, because we believe that there's a lot to be learned from that. So thank you for being part of that too.
Yes. Thank you for having a good healthy section in there. That's wonderful, because that actually leads into what inspired the Scholarly Banana in the first place. So I'm going to take you now to 2014. So this was about the time I was making those comics, thereabout, doing Republic of Cute Stuff. So, but personally, I was just a nerd collecting folklore books. So my husband has a tradition. We've been together since, I think, 2005. So Ben has a tradition where every year on my birthday, he'll take me bookstore hopping, and I'll just be like, okay, go crazy. And it's great. Now, this particular year was terrible. So I'm going to all these stores. Of course, the first place I run to is the folklore section. I couldn't find anything. It was all the same stuff. Now, granted, I'd been collecting these books for a while, but come on now. It's like, there's got to be something else. Everything just seemed like I either owned it already, or it was just the same stuff as over and over again. And I was thinking like, oh no, what do I do? Like, it's my birthday and I want a folklore book. So that really got me thinking, like, all right, if I don't want these books here, like if none of these are what I want, what do I want? So I thought maybe if I could define that a little bit better for myself, then I would find something and then win, yay, get a new book, because that's all I want. I just want a book. So I was thinking it would be so cool if someone were to take all of the interesting facts and the research from those academic books. I wanted the uncensored stories. I wanted the history, but I was like, it would be kind of cool if it was targeted more towards a general audience crowd, because those books, there's a range, I guess, of how heavy the content is, but they're very academic in tone. It's an academic subject.
They're for lit crit people. They're
for lit crit people. Yes. Absolutely. Which I love. Like, obviously I love it. I love it. But I thought, this subject, it's fairy tales. It's so universal. Everyone comes in with a baseline knowledge of what these stories are. wouldn't it be amazing if we could take the information from that lit crit and just present it a little bit looser? Don't change it, don't disrespect it, but just, can we have some fun with this a little bit? Maybe more people would get into it. It could be like a little gateway into being a nerd, I thought that would be amazing, and thinking about it more, like, that's essentially edutainment, right? That's not a new concept of taking something that's educational and making it fun. That happens a lot. And you can even see that with, mythology has some things like that. I know Rick Riordan has a book about like Greek gods that I've read that's very casual in tone, really funny, but totally tells the stories faithfully. There's tons of stuff about Shakespeare. Like there's all these different topics that people try to play with and bring down, but I had never seen it done with folklore studies. I thought, oh, someone's got to be doing that. Like maybe I'll look in YA. Maybe someone's done it in YA. This would be great, maybe put some pictures with it, make it funny. I'm totally going to find this book. So, yeah, I looked for a few years and I couldn't find it. The thing was, I just got more and more, I guess, I don't know what the word would be. I was a little bit perplexed at why. Like, why doesn't this exist? Please, someone write it. I felt so desperate. And I thought, you know what? If I'm this worked up over a book not being there, maybe that should tell me something.
You found a purpose.
I found a purpose. And, I didn't think that it was even possible to write a book. That's why it didn't dawn on me at first, because I was like, well, I'm not an author. Like, I don't even know how to do that. And I wasn't even sure, like, that sounds like a crazy amount of work. I don't even know. Like, I'm not even going to.
When you found out it is.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, spoiler alert, it is. But it dawned on me. I'm like, you know what? Maybe there's a chance. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm making. But there's a very good chance I'm actually the perfect person to make this. It combines all those things that I've loved all of my life. I've been desperate to combine. This is about a subject I've been a super fan of for like over a decade. All right, and if I could do it, I thought there's my chance to get more people interested in this topic. If I could break down that barrier, that where people don't want to read academic books, there's a lot of people that just simply won't read an academic book. I thought if I can maybe be the one to give them that information and really show them how cool these researchers are and the stuff that, that these stories are, it can, I don't know, I saw a lot of good in that. I thought people could really love it. So, yeah, in 2016, I started my first draft, not knowing if the gut feeling I had was going to amount to anything, or if what it was that I wanted even made sense outside my own head. But spoiler alert, 3 years later, that gut feeling is what became the Scholarly Banana series. So that was the impetus behind the thing. I was really just a reader looking for a book and couldn't find it. So I did it. So a little bit about what the Scholarly Banana is then, and what I've built then based on the gut feeling. So the Scholarly Banana is a comedic graphic novel series for teens and adults that retells old dark fairy tales and tricks you into learning fun facts about them. So the first detail that a lot of people would notice, obviously, is the art style. So I create my illustrations with handmade sculptures and photography, as you kind of saw, which is my background and things I love to do. I designed the Scholarly Bananas artwork specifically to capture that special handcrafted tactile look that a lot of the old school stop motion films had. I grew up loving like Clash of the Titans with Ray Harryhausen's stop motion, and Rankin Bass, which are the company that did the Christmas specials.
Rudolph and
Yes.
Frosty, yep.
Yep. That was a big part of my childhood and adulthood. I just love how they look. There's just something about that look I'm really drawn to. And I thought it would be really special to have a series, especially in a book, that could do that. I just thought that would be amazing. So I really wanted that as a part from the start. Now,
I have a question for you, Carly,
sure.
before you go on.
Yeah.
Maybe you're answering it. Why a banana?
Okay, I'm glad you asked this question. Okay, so the name came because, well, okay, a little background first. I initially, let me see if I can find a picture that goes along with this. Initially in drafting this concept, let me go in my drafts here. I actually pulled out one of my Republic of Cute characters. He was named Buck. And I thought maybe I'll use my Republic of Cute gang as the cast, kind of like to be like essentially like Muppet-esque. Maybe they will be the stars of this series. So I started working with one of those characters and I thought, this isn't really working for me. The reason why I didn't want a nonsensical, like a fantasy character, because I thought it skewed a little too young to have, not that the banana isn't silly, but the little purple guy was a little bit too young looking for me. I thought, I don't want people to have to look at it and wonder, what is this creature?
They know what a banana is, yes.
Yeah, so that was number one. I was like, okay, I want an identifiable object.
Carly, I think you accidentally muted yourself.
Okay, I don't know where I stopped when I stopped talking.
Well, this is why we have crash edits in the future. So,
oh, cool.
Pick a place and start going.
All right. Well, the banana. I wanted it like I think you might have heard me say that I wanted it to be an identifiable thing. So you look at a banana, you know what that is. I knew this was going to be an academic series, definitely heavy on the research forward. It's silly, but it's research forward. So it's going to be scholarly. He's a banana because the banana is a comedy symbol, like slipping on a banana peel or saying things like, that's bananas, that's crazy. And I thought that's exactly what I'm making. I'm making craziness that is legitimately scholarly. So he's the scholarly banana. So inherited my character Buck's bucktooth, and I put some glasses on him, and that was how he was born. He was actually born immediately after my very first draft, making it. So very early on, I had named the series, which was amazing because things don't come very easily when you're creating something. It's a very messy process. A lot of times you have to draft things many times to circle around to get to an idea that really clicks with you. It worked out very well for me, though, that I had that character and that name so early, because it really did help me stay focused on what the series was. Scholarly banana craziness. So that's why he is what he is. So he's actually, his function now in the series is to be the mascot and to tie the entire series together, because going into this, I did envision it as a series. I knew I wasn't going in to make a single book. I saw this as a bigger project. So he's the one that will tie it together. He functions as essentially like our class clown, like our reading buddy. He's along the adventure with us. He'll jump in and out of the narrative, playing with it. And so he'll be there for little commentary, little side thoughts about what's happening in the story. Whoops, what am I doing here? I don't know what's happening with my mouse.
You're fading, yes.
I am. Oh my gosh.
Special effects.
Special effects. Gosh.
Oh, there we go.
That's never happened before. All right, I'm back to life. Ooh, okay. Well, sort of. All right, your vision is not failing. It's me failing on my trackpad here. Okay, let's not do that again. All right, so yes, so the banana is jumping in and out of the story. He also plays a role in every one of the tales. So in Fitcher's Bird, he played an evil sociopathic wizard guy. But in the Juniper Tree, he plays a very innocent little girl named Marlene. So he's he's a great actor, that banana, which is amazing. He'll do whatever I want him to. It's great. So that is basically him. Now, the actual content of the book, the flow, I break it out into different sections. So I'll start with an intro that gets you up to speed on any background information that I think you would want to know about the story. So you're not going in cold. These are things that we don't typically learn in school, really. A lot of people are familiar, like with the Grimms, a lot of people have heard the name. Or at least a fair amount of people have heard the name. But there's some things about them that people don't necessarily get right. And so this kind of sets you with a certain, I don't know, a bunch of information so you can, I guess, appreciate the story a little bit more for what it is. The story section is a retelling of the story in my own way. So for this part, I'm imagining that you and I are just hanging out. We're just friends and we are talking about what is going on in these stories. Now, being in 2021, it's not the 1800s anymore. We're going to see these stories through our own unique perspectives, which are not necessarily going to match with the time in which they were told. So my way of dealing with that is to acknowledge the elephants in the room. If something crazy happens in the story, to us, something strikes me as weird, I'll point it out. It's a lot of just playing with extreme things that happen in the story and having some fun with that.
Oh, you have a lot of fun with this. You bring a lot of contemporary jokes, and this is where I could see your mettle as a comedy writer, because you bring in all this stuff that you might see on Saturday Night Live or in Mad Magazine that satirizes today's culture as well as that. So I appreciate a lot of that stuff.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is. Because I think one of the coolest things about folklore studies is we're seeing it from our perspective now, but then you learn all these. What's great about the series, and really my point about the series, is we're going to have fun with these and be irreverent about it and really play with it. Let's just play with it. Why not? These are fairy tales. This isn't one of the downsides with mythology is actually what's one person's myth was one other person's religion. You're getting into a little territory there. With folk tales and fairy tales, these were never meant to be, these were told for fun. So there's a lot really you can do and just play. And I love to just play with it. Now, the whole point of the series then is to move into the scholarly part from that. So we bust it open then and we look at like, okay, this thing that we were just joking about, that's so crazy. Like, for example, in the Juniper Tree, there is a wicked stepmother that is crushed to death by a millstone. So a bird flies into the town. Somehow the millstone around his neck fly back and then executes this evil stepmother to punish her for her wicked deeds. Now, at least when I was reading this, I was thinking like a millstone. There's got to be an easier way to kill this woman. Like, could you not peck out her eyes? Hitchcock style. There's, oh my gosh, a millstone? Why? You have to fly with this big rock. It seems like a terrible hassle. That's just weird. So that's how it's presented in the story. It's okay, that's just weird. Well, once you look deeper into the Juniper Tree, I love to discover that the thing that you initially dismissed as weird actually has a purpose in there. So the Juniper Tree is a very religious tale. It has a lot of, it's a Christian sort of allegory. And I had no idea that the millstone is a biblical reference, that in the Bible, I guess it is mentioned as a way to punish people, those who sin against children, something I
Or a millstone.
Yeah. And I did not realize that. It's like, well, that explains the millstone. Okay, because this woman was, she's actually one of the most evil villains in fairy tale history for what she's done. And it was all against her innocent stepson. And so that's actually a very fitting way for her to die. It wasn't random. It made perfect sense once you learned the context of the story and what was going on. And so I love those little discoveries, but still being very, I guess, have a very light attitude about it. These are very, speaking of all this gruesome stuff, these are very gruesome stories. The Juniper Tree especially was a really big challenge in a lot of ways because it does touch on themes that are, well, same with the Fisher's Bird. Very dark themes. These are very, I mean, if you really look at them, these are serious problems. They're pretty awful. Trying to keep it light though, and move through and looking at this in ways that we can then also learn things about what was maybe going on at the time. Fisher's Bird has some of that with the history of just a particular serial killer that had murdered some of his wives, and it's dark subjects, but me personally, I like to deal with those dark subjects in a lighthearted way, not to trivialize them, but to make them, I guess, just to be able to get through life. That's my way of, I guess, contributing things, is to try to keep it jovial and
well, if I may comment, it's like you're taking on the mantle that the Brothers Grimm did, because initially was not their first compendium to be they're folklorists. They're collecting tales from all over the place and putting them together because they're interesting. And then they realized, well, edutainment, maybe I can make these things more fun or more gruesome, and more people will buy them.
You got it. And that's actually one of the coolest things I think about the group. A lot of people have asked me why the Grimms. And that's a big reason. I think the history of the Grimm brothers is really fascinating.
And I learned it all from you.
Oh, I was going to congratulate you on that knowledge, but I'll congratulate us both. Great. Yeah, it's really interesting that they, so a lot of people nowadays, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to. I've done a few shows with my book. And so many people will immediately comment like, oh, these were the real fairy tales that the Grimms collected. These are real ones. Like, and Disney's the one that changed all of it. Like, you'd be surprised at how everybody's the same. Not really. Like, the Grimms were humans too. They also wanted to sell their books. And yes, they made a lot of edits to it to make it more appealing to their audience, because that's what happens. And I think that's the coolest. I think that's cool. So stories now that are new, I think that's cool. That's how stories work. And that actually brings me to that final part in my book, which is the original version. So I include an original in an original version in here. I say "and" because there's a lot of different translations, but I'll take a version of it, and so you can have it all within the same little bundle of scholarliness. And I do that because I am making this series as a super fan of these stories and of the research. And I thought, I'm not here to supplant and to be like, this is the banana's the new thing. Move over, everybody. Like, this is the banana. Like, no, I'm not doing that. This is all about celebrating cool old stories and seeing what we can take from playing with them, and then seeing how much we can learn from them and apply it to stories now. And it helps us think about what we're reading now more critically. So, you know, I've had some people look at, oh, I can show you, it's right here. Okay, so this is my original cover for Fitcher's Bird. So it was the banana wielding this axe. So, and I actually do that intentionally. If you wonder why my covers are gory, it's to indicate that these are not for like little kids. So it's
intentional. That a bit overboard? No. Oh.
Well, you know, I don't know. You've read the book, so you see what's in the. Yeah, it's pretty accurate.
But not quite as straight up. This is a gory book. It's just like, be careful.
Yeah, and I said, what's this? The most sinister part of this book is I am secretly gonna make you a huge nerd. Like, that's what I'm gonna do. That's the goal, you know, like, I'm gonna get you to nerd out about these stories, and you're probably not gonna know it. That's the crafty teacher spirit in me, like, you will like these stories. And I think people genuinely do. I mean, this is like, I pick out the most interesting research I can find. If I don't think it's interesting, I don't put it in, you know. Sometimes there's not, the stories I pick are all picked for very specific reasons. And the reason is largely driven by how interesting is the story and how interesting is the research.
What can you do with it because of your particular milieu of storytelling?
Yeah. And the thing with the story is, like, right now I'm actually drafting for Little Red Riding Hood. Now that is, and you know, the same thing happened with the Juniper Tree. Okay, Fitcher's Bird is a really wacky story. So it's very, very, very easy to be very wacky in the retelling because the story is pretty crazy in a pretty silly way, I think, at least. Now the Juniper Tree was a little bit different. It took a little bit of a different tactic to pull out the humor in that one. But I'm very confident that whatever story I have, I'll present it in a way that's enjoyable, because the stories themselves, I think, are enjoyable. Now the research, I can't make that stuff up. So before I even pick a story, I will make sure that there's enough interesting research about it to merit a book about it. You know, I want that scholarly section to really give you the most bang for your buck. And it's a breezy read. It's a quick read, but I like to say that it's very nutrient dense in that you can move through it quickly. It's not going to take you all day to read my book, but I also make it, put things in the illustrations, and I try to craft it in a way that you'll want to go back and reread it. You know, after you read that original version, I've heard from a lot of people that have gone through the book that made them want to go back, which is great. That's exactly what I want you to do. Go back. Once you have this whole picture, then once you go back and reread it, you're reading it through a different lens now that you have this information, and then you can form your own opinions about what's going on. And I think that's just such a treat. And I'd love for people to experience that and just enjoy thinking about stories in a different way. So that was that. Did you want me to go into any of the drafting stuff I had, or where do you want me to take this from here?
I remember that you said you didn't know how to make books when you started off with this, and you kind of learned through painful experiments. Just talk about a bit of the drafting, and then the production story you told me was rather interesting too.
Sure. Okay. So like I mentioned, my drafting phase started in 2016. It lasted full 3 years. Drafting, I liken that to every day was like trying to run up a wall and slamming against the wall and thinking, oh, can't do this, but I got to do this every day, just trying and trying. There was so much I had to learn in so many different fields, and it was very overwhelming at first. So my plan going into it was I was going to start with what I thought I had the best grasp on, which was the arts. So I was like, okay, I've been a professional artist for a few years, so I can do this. Surely, I can do something, right? So going with my initial feeling of I wanted it to be sculpture, that's what I did. So these are what you're looking at here. These are 3 pages from a medieval version of Little Red Riding Hood called The Story of Grandmother. So these are, this is just the public domain text. I'm not doing any of the writing. I was just trying to see here how difficult it would be to sculpt the artwork and to have that be what the book is, because I didn't know. Before that, the most I had ever done was single page, just like a one-shot, like Instagram posts for Toy Photography. I never built sets really that were that elaborate. I didn't know what I was getting into. So I did my best and I made these 3 pages. I liked how they looked. One of my problems, problem 1, I did not know how to put characters in this thing. I'm like, how am I gonna, I was a sculptor, but I wasn't making puppets. I was making things to be as strong and as beautiful as I could, not to be flexible. So I thought, oh, how am I gonna actually do this? Okay, I need to figure that out. And then I also hadn't, once I realized I wasn't gonna have the Republic of Cute characters be in it, I thought, oh, I actually haven't sculpted people before. Oh, I guess I should have a style for that. Okay, all right, sculpt people that can move. All right, don't know how to do that. And then looking at these images, so the finished images are on top, and then you can see underneath, well, hopefully you can see, is what my sets look like. Very just thrown together, just trying to do my best to get the shot. I liked the final result, but here's the problem. You don't get things right on the first try. Especially if you don't know what you're doing. God, I didn't even know what I was making. Of course, I wasn't going to get this right on my first try. I knew I was going to have to do hundreds, if not thousands of drafts. I thought there's no way I could ever edit this stuff. How would I do that? Okay. Apart from all that, I didn't even know what I was making. So I had the gut feeling that I wanted this funny, artistic, nerd folklore book. And I knew I wanted to be called The Scholarly Banana. That was it. I knew I wanted a scholarly section, and I knew I wanted to talk about comparative literature, like the similar stories. Yeah. Apart from that, I didn't know. So I was like, okay, I can't sculpt as much as I want to. I cannot do this. I'm going to have to figure out how to actually level up my other skills. So I spent a good two years almost, not sculpting. I tried anything I could think of. I thought, okay, if I'm not going to sculpt, maybe this is for the best. Maybe I'm going to stumble upon a different medium that will actually work out better for me. So I tried a lot of different things. I tried collage. I tried traditional illustration. I made some, learned how to do animation. Anything I thought of that I thought might help me develop more my concept or learn how to make a book, I tried. So it was a lot of blog posts, a lot of learning how to storyboard and to make a sequence, and then being a better editor. This was years of work, of drafts that I constantly would think I was onto something, and then I'd be like, oh, wait, no, that doesn't quite work. So a lot of starting and stopping, and that's why I wanted to really point out that my experience with the bakery, that really helped me of thinking, I want to do this so much. Let me just enjoy what I'm doing, do my absolute best, and just, okay, so I have to do it a million times. What's my alternative? My alternative is not doing it at all. Well, I don't want that. I want to do this so bad. I'm like, so it's worth doing it. And so I might as well just lean into it and try to do the best I can do. Eventually, and it did not feel, this was a very long process, but eventually my skills in the writing and in the planning of the book leveled up enough that I was able to go back and revisit the sculpture as the look for the book. So in 2018, I started drafting again, this time with sculpture. I was still figuring out what I was doing, but I was a little bit closer to at least being able to do something. I got more than 3 pages, which was a major victory. So at this time, I was drafting 3 different stories, not at the same time, mind you. I would cycle. So I would alternate between Little Red Riding Hood, a version of Little Red Riding Hood called The Story of Grandmother, the Juniper Tree, and Fitcher's Bird was the last one. I did this for a few reasons. Again, going into this, I was confused about a lot of things. I had a lot to figure out, but one thing I knew for sure is I wanted it to be a series. I knew this was a series. So I really wanted to prove the concept that whatever I was making could work across different stories. I was very afraid that of picking a story that was just really easy and then publishing it. And then after the fact, finding out that it was like a one-hit wonder and I couldn't do anything ever again. I was like, I'm going to make sure that whatever format I have set up to move forward will work with me and I can use it to make a cohesive series. So that's one reason why I did it. The other reason was I did so much drafting. It helped to break it up a little bit and try different stories. If you had talked to me in 2018, I would have told you very proudly I was going to publish the Juniper Tree first. And that didn't happen for a few reasons. The long story short, it's a very complicated, it's twice as long as Fitcher's Bird, and it's a difficult story. Fitcher's Bird was the one I published first. So what you're looking at here is an excerpt from Fitcher's Bird. So people asked sometimes why Fitcher's Bird was the first one. And the answer is just very simple. It was because as I was drafting the series, now I'm making this from scratch. I'm not modeling it after anything, which was really tricky. You know, when you're making creative projects, it's always a remix. Like you can always use something as like a reference. Like, okay, like I want to make a cookbook. Like I like to look at this cookbook. I'm making a cookbook. So maybe I'll use like, maybe how they shot, you know, these photos, maybe my photos will look similar. Or there are different ways you can remix what other people have done before you as your way to make your own path. With this particular project, I could not find anything to model. So even organizing the book and figuring out what it was going to look like was a big challenge for me. So when I went through and showed you the different sections of the book with the intro and the story and the scholarly part, that was not in my head when I was drafting. I had versions where the scholarly tidbits were worked into the page. It was a lot to figure out. So I was drafting Fitcher's Bird at the time when I had that revelation of, hey, I can organize it into essentially these chapters where it's this intro first, and then I'll do the story, and then I'll do the scholarly part. I was drafting Fitcher's at the time. Those sculptures happened to be in the best shape. And I thought, got it. That's how I'm going to organize my book. And from there, it was just straight on with Fitcher's Bird. I didn't revisit the Juniper Tree. I just went straight forward with that. Now, the organizing it into sections, like that might seem like the most obvious thing in the world to you. I don't know. I don't know how it sounds. Because it sounds like, I don't know, that's kind of simple, right? That did not occur to me. You know, I tried a lot of things, and that wasn't part of the process until later. And then I just had that revelation, was able to push forward with it. But, you know, like we mentioned before, it takes a lot of writing and rewriting and redoing to get to what you want to do. So, you mentioned you wanted me to get a little bit into the how. I just showed you what wasn't working a little bit. I'm going to take you through and show you how I actually make one of the books. So the very first thing, as I've touched on a little bit before, I will actually research before I even commit to the story. Again, that's because I want to make sure that the scholarly section is as strong as it can be, because not all stories have a ton of research attached to it. I want to make sure that I pick something that's interesting. So I will research first. I get my books from OhioLink, which is a library loan that hooks me up with books from Ohio colleges and universities, which is great because it's the scholarly banana and I need to make sure that he is scholarly. And a good way to do that is to make sure that my resources are coming from places that would have like vetted the what's in their library. So I can be sure that what I'm presenting to you is as legit as it can be. So once I have the research, I do start drafting a simple pencil paper just to organize my thoughts, to break the action down into pages and get an idea of what I'm gonna do. Now, this, I will spend, I think for the Juniper Tree, I spent about 2 months in this preliminary drafting phase just to get my bearings on it before I do anything else. But I want to make a mention. This phase does not stop. Absolutely does not stop. I'm going through the entire time with paper drafts and writing and sketching. But before I sculpt, before I do anything, I want to make sure I at least have some sort of game plan. So I'm not going into it blind. Because that's what I did back in 2016, and that's why it didn't work. So I did learn from that mistake. Now, once I have a vision of what I'm doing and what I'm going to need as far as characters and props go, I will start sculpting early. I like to get my characters made pretty early on because it just helps me envision everything more because I know what I'm working with. So it just helps, I guess, inform my drafts more. So if you're curious, these are the supplies I use to make my sculptures and sets. The most important one is that bottom left rectangle. It's polymer clay. So this is polymer clay in the raw. It is, it's malleable. It's kind of like Play-Doh, but a little different texture. You can bake it in a home oven, and it goes from being this squishy texture to being rock solid. And that is the material I used for my previous work when I worked as a sculptor, a visual artist. So for sculpture, my first order of business is to do the main characters. And I'm going to show you a few tricks I use to make this work in a book. So I build these pieces modularly. So obviously the characters are going to have to change positions. They're going to have to assume different expressions and poses. So I do this by sculpting their heads separate from the bodies and not putting arms on them. I don't put eyes on them, like pupils on them. So this lets me swap out heads to have different expressions if I need to. The arms are all raw clay that I will kind of jam on the side of them, and it lets me position those arms any way I want as I'm sculpting them. So doing it this way saves me from having to make thousands of sculptures, which, that was a big question mark in my head of that first, when I went into this, because no one was really doing any tutorials of this. So I didn't have anybody telling me like, oh, here's how you do it. I looked a little bit to stop motion techniques, but I'm also not a puppet maker. So this is my way that I figured out how to do it. So this way works for me. So that's what I want to show you. Now, the main characters I build to be very strong and to be as good looking as possible. I do put a lot of care into the design of them and the execution, because these characters I will use for the entire production. These are workhorses. They get no breaks. The Juniper Tree I shot for about 1.5 years. So these things have to stay for 1.5 years. Now, might sound like I put an awful lot of work into what I do, which is true, but not everything I do is so pristine. Don't tell anybody. This is going to stay between us and the internet here. I don't necessarily put the same amount of finishing work into something that is only going to get a 1-page appearance. So, for example, these are images from the Juniper Tree. This was just a side little page. The hedgehog here, he does not have a back. This Rapunzel's tower is actually raw, unbaked clay that I just smushed onto a toilet paper roll. Put it neatly aside and thought, okay, well, if I need to reshoot it, I'll have it, but hopefully I won't have to reshoot it and call it done. So that's the reality of some of these props is I often need things for just one shot, and that helps me, picking and choosing my battles of what I'm spending time on is helpful just to get it done. So once I have these props, I will start doing photo drafts. I call these photo drafts because they were very drafty. I'm still very much figuring out what I'm doing, but being able to shoot them with photography really does give me better ideas. So again, I like to go into these a little early just to play around. Even if they're rough, I like to get those under my belt. I think that it just helps more creative flow to it. If you're curious, this is some of my photo gear. It's very relatively simple. It's just a digital SLR, some small LED lights. They definitely have to be small because my characters are small. And just something steady to hold them on is all that really is. So the process here is pretty straightforward. It's sketch, photograph, repeat. A lot. Now, every time I'm going through, I'm making more assessments of, what's working and what isn't working. I'll get more ideas. Eventually, my sketches will start becoming a little bit more, a little neater as I move through. After a few months of doing this, I'll start to sort out what I want, and it makes that workflow a little bit more comfortable, but it is very uncomfortable for a while, working in a very rough stage. Now, I wanted to show you just a few examples of what it looks like going from draft to finished page. So this is the first one. It is very simple. This is about as simple as I can get. Because there really isn't very much to work around here. It's just a single character in a big negative space with this drawn in text. So that translates from my idea pretty well. Didn't really make any major changes to that. Something like this though, now what happens, I'll often keep my concept that I'm working on. Like here you can see the woman, the concept is this evil stepmother is toting this, this corpse around. She's planning on getting rid of it in a very bizarre way. And I like the idea of her kind of whistling to herself with this thing and being in front of the house. I wanted to show where it was. It worked, but in the actual finished book, having it be that more of the close shot, which you see in the sketch, didn't flow as well with the pages next to it. I think I had another close shot on the neighboring page. It just looked a little bit better if I were to reshoot it and zoom out more. So a lot of times I'll reshoot for a very minor change like that. But because I'm working physically, like with these props, it's not a simple, just click, 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 digitally change something. Like, no, I actually have to go back, reset up my scene and rephotograph and then go through the process. So it is a labor intensive process, but it really is a labor of love. I do enjoy, I think it's worth it to do for me. I sometimes I have to remind myself of that, but that's what goes along with the territory. Here, sometimes I'll have to make, one of the biggest things I always do with my drafts and alterations is it's sometimes difficult to know how much space text will actually need. I think a general rule of thumb is it always takes up like 3 times the amount of space that I think it will. So sometimes I'll have to go back and make adjustments. This case, I also had to zoom out to make room for that text on the left-hand bar. So that's some of how that works there. Now, the retouching aspect is one of my favorite parts. So I use Photoshop to finish my images. One of the first things I do with every photo, regardless of how drafty it is, I will convert it to black and white. I like to share this with people because this is a little design tip for you. Color always makes things look a lot better than they are. It makes things look a lot more finished and impressive. By taking that away, it really makes your eye go to the composition and the lighting and the things about the photo that I can't change in Photoshop. So let's say I did not like where that horizon line is hitting her. Like my eye goes right to that horizon. Like, okay, if I don't want it there, I'm gonna have to reshoot that. Like I can't change that in Photoshop. So like, those are the questions I'm asking myself. I've turned it to black and white saying, do I need to reshoot this? Because I wanna know that before I start fiddling with this thing in Photoshop. So that's the first thing I do. Now I never actually take it back into color. And that is because I do all of my coloring digitally in Photoshop. Layer by layer, I'll go and I'll paint the colors on. The layers, I do this because for a couple of reasons. One, it allows me to drop a color palette in and get perfectly consistent colors throughout my entire book. So the pages will match each other. The other reason it's, I just set myself up very early to be able to adjust different colors very easily. It means if I want the grass to be pink, with a simple click, I have it set up that I can do that. So I do digitally color. I just wanted to bring that up because a lot of people don't really realize that that's what's happening here, but it is. The final part of Photoshop is things that are quote unquote Photoshopped. So this would be the retouching. The characters often get pretty dirty. And the camera picks up a lot that you don't see, little fuzzies, little pieces of lint. Like people will have gunk on their face. So I'll do them a favor and I'll retouch those out. Anything that's distracting to the eye, I will digitally remove. But I don't want these to look so clean. Like I don't want them to look like airbrushed perfection because these are handmade sculptures. I actually do like that they look a little bit rough. I intentionally do let them be a little bit rougher than I would if I were selling these as finished sculptures. Because I thought that aesthetic worked well for the book. Again, that tactile, old school, homemade. This is a homemade thing. So I want it to look homemade. So the retouching is in Photoshop. The other elements are the like nature elements, like rainbows and clouds, stars, the starbursts, speech balloons are all written in. That's a fun fact. That's actually my least favorite part is writing in the speech balloons. My handwriting is atrocious and I hate doing it. But yeah, that's in Photoshop. And pupils and eyebrows. And the fire. I am very serious about my work. I will put everything I have into it, but I refuse to set my props on fire. I do not want to burn my house down. So thus, that is added digitally. So that is the Photoshop roundup. I spend a lot of time in Photoshop, and so it is very good that I love it so much. On the other hand, one thing that I do not necessarily love so much is InDesign. So InDesign is the page layout program that I use to actually make the book layout. So this is where all my pages live. This is a screenshot of what the Juniper Tree looks like zoomed out in InDesign. So you can see the flow of these pages. Now, one of the biggest challenges of making a book like this, that's graphical, very visual in nature, is there's a lot of zooming in and out. So I'm checking to make sure that the flow, I want the pages to look great on their own, but these aren't single pages, it's a book. So, the left page has to look good with its neighbor page, and then those have to look good next to those other pages. So it's a sequence. So I'm always zooming in and out, asking if the flow feels good.
And as you told me on Friday, this was not something you initially did because you had planned to publish these as ebooks, correct? So it's one page at a time for an ebook, but a 2-page layout has to have some thought in it, or it may look like a dog's breakfast.
Absolutely. Yes. You called me out on that one for sure. So yeah, you're right. My Fitcher's bird wasn't designed like this. Fitcher's bird was designed one page at a time, which was a godsend that I was naive enough that I didn't think I had to print it and I could do it that way, which, I mean, obviously, I went and printed it. At the time I was making it though, I didn't think I was going to. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll do it with one page. I was trying to bring the bar down as far as I could with anything, just so I could get through it. And so it looked great on its own. And then retroactively, I thought, oh, now I have to finagle this into a printed book. Now it has a neighbor. So that took some working after the fact, but moving forward for the Juniper Tree, that was more of a challenge. That's actually why one of the reasons why the Juniper Tree in a lot of ways was more difficult than Fitcher's bird. I did not have that consideration of its neighbor or, a physical flow. So even though that's one of the more challenging aspects of designing the book, that's might be one of my favorites, of just feeling that rhythm. I don't know. I was a music person growing up. So there's something that just feels very, I don't know, music-y about it. Something with like the rhythm, like the pace and just kind of feeling the color flow. I don't know. I love and hate it. But that's that. And so the final book does get exported to my printer from InDesign. It looks just like this. So that's how the book is made. And eventually I will be done. I will never believe it, but lo and behold, you keep working on something. Here's your lesson, kids. You keep working on something long enough and eventually it will be done. You may look like this, but it will be done. And it's unbelievable. So I'm going to touch really quick on publishing. So my publisher is Semper Ridiculum, which is me. I knew from the get-go that I was going to go the independent publishing route. It just made sense for me at the time. I was like, that would be great to get my bearings and really figure out for myself of what I wanted the series to be, where I could really be in charge of making every call creatively of what feels right for me and build it that way and then see how it goes. When I know that I'm fully responsible for the product. I really did tailor make the Scholarly Banana to be everything that I love and that I love to do bundled into it. So a lot of people ask how I could keep going for so long, which hasn't been that long really, but it's 2016. But for a long time without, especially in the beginning when you don't have much payout, like external payout, that wasn't as hard when you're doing something that means so much to you in such a deep way. And it was all things that this book was all things that were in my wheelhouse or I wanted to be in my wheelhouse. Like, okay, maybe I'm not the most amazing graphic designer, or like maybe my writing could be improved, and all those things. I hope, as more time goes on, that it does improve. Everything does improve. But I thought, I have the desire to be better at everything in here. And isn't that great? Like, because that's what you want. So I went into there thinking, okay, I'm just going to do my absolute best and then see where it goes. Maybe do a few books and worry about whether or not I could even make them, and then see what happens there. So that's that. One of the, we talked on Friday a little bit for this, and we were saying that, one of the benefits is that you have complete creative control when you self-publish. The downside is that you don't have support from anybody else to do it. So you have to be a one-person shop and do crazy things like I did, like cold call the Avon Lake Library and say, hey, can we talk? But this whole project means so much to me. I think again, the takeaway would be, if you have something that means so much, to really find something that means so much to you, it makes all those things a little bit easier.
You kind of have to do some of this stuff yourself, because you may get help from publishers, workforce of people who know what they're doing, but sometimes you may not like what they're doing to your vision. And they will insist that, well, we have to do this or we're not going to sell any. And they're also going to take a certain amount of your royalties back because of all the work they did that may or may not make your book a success. Whereas this way, you're wholly responsible for that, up or down.
Right. And I knew going into it that I was I was putting myself in an in-between market. Like, I had a fear going into it, like right off the bat, like, ooh, I don't want to pitch this and because I didn't have anything set at that time to prove that this concept would work. I thought, if I go into this without having proven something already, if I go into this with just an idea, I fear that I would be pigeonholed into being the illustrator for a public domain book about fairy tales, or put in the children's section. And as the reader that was inspired to do this, that's not what I would do it, but that's not what I felt I was meant to do. And I didn't want to put myself in a position where I was even tempted to stray from.
And that's not what this is. This is a completely original take on these things. It looks professionally made. This is not amateur hour. On the cover and within, a lot of care has been taken into this, and it shows. It's something that, like I said, can compete with anything, I'm sure, out there. And in fact, there is nothing like this out there. So that's why I'm very happy to find it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you so much for having me on here. And that it really does mean a lot to me to be able to come up here and share the experience and the process and talk with you about it. And yeah, it means a lot. I'm still trudging forward. I'm in the early phases for my third book, which is going to be about Little Red Riding Hood. So you can see here the newest villain in the Scholarly Banana series is this fuzzy little fellow here. So hopefully I'll have that book out sometime in, I'm going to try for this calendar year, but it might not be till 2022. Seeing how things go, though, do my best. But that's the whole banana in the peel. So I, again, just want to thank you for having me on, and thanks everyone that's here now in the chat or is watching later.
Yes. Okay. So are there any questions from this very friendly audience? Well, seeing none, then I want to thank you again, Carly, for joining us. And you have yourself a good evening, and best of luck with your future works. I know there's going to be hopefully more than Little Red Riding Hood. There's more in the pipeline. We'll see what happens with that. Okay.
Yes.
I just want to say thank you, Carly. You're amazing, and your work is inspiring and awesome.
Thank you, Victoria. And yes, thanks you again. Thank you, Avon Lake Library and everybody. And yeah, I will, Banana thanks you too. He's right here, his little clay glory with his little toothpick.
All right. Okay. So, all right. Well, have a great night. And thanks again for joining us. We're going to keep doing this every week, all summer long. So be back here next week for more authors and more fun. And every Tuesday after that. So, okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, Carly West, everybody. Scholarly Banana. This has been Read Write Local Unbound. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.